Get your ears wrapped around the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast. All the scoop you need to know from college basketball to the NBA and even March Madness. News of your rising stars. Topics on and off the hardwood. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast.
Thank you for tuning in to the GSMC Basketball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Isiah Quiroz. Today we're going to talk about the latest trades, then compare the Raptors' recent success versus the sliding Sixers, and similarly, we'll talk about the rising Nuggets and the falling Jazz. We'll then see how the Grizzlies have been doing and how they stack up in the West, and we'll check in with the Heat and see if with their new acquisitions they can really make a push in the East. And then we'll end the show with some predictions for some of the bigger games happening over the next few days. Now, trades. Trade deadline is Thursday. I believe it's 3 p.m. Eastern, 12 p.m. Pacific time, if I'm not mistaken. So it's coming down to the wires. There are some big trades happening thus far. So with the knowledge that I've gathered over the last few days and with the timeline in which I'm producing this podcast, I'm going to give you the most up-to-date trades that I know of as of now. Hopefully, not too many big trades happen from now when I'm going to release this podcast to when things will happen, but I'm sure that'll happen because that's just how it goes in the NBA. Trades always go down to the very last minute. But the biggest ones that I know of as of right now, Iguodala is going to play this year. And no, it's not going to be for the Memphis Grizzlies. Andre Iguodala was acquired by the Memphis Grizzlies in the offseason, and he has decided to sit out for most of the season, much to the dismay of some of his younger teammates. We'll get to that in a little bit. But yeah, he's decided not to play because he just didn't see a point for not playing for a team that he didn't think were serious contenders. I mean, I believe it's like his 16th year in the season as of right now. He's already a 3-time champion, 1-time finals MVP. So, I mean, at this point in his career, he's a veteran. He kind of earned that right to kind of take a step back and really focus on, other things other than basketball. He's really been pushing his new book that he just came out with. He's been figuring out life outside of basketball, his retirement plans, and just making money moves, basically. But he is part of a trade that's going to see him play now. He's very excited about this opportunity. He's going to go to the Miami Heat. And not only that, he's getting a $30 million contract extension over 2 years. So he cashed out, spent all this time basically taking a vacation, and now he's cashing out. He's going to go to Miami. Great weather, great team, great situation. Dylan Brooks and John Morant are probably very happy about this. They expressed their dissatisfaction with Andre Iguodala a couple days ago. Dylan Brooks saying how he can't wait till they trade him away from the Grizzlies so that they can actually play him and show them what they're all about. And John Morant kind of echoed this thought by retweeting it, favoring it, whatever, on social media. Stephen Curry actually got in on the conversation by adding a picture of Andre Iguodala on his Instagram with the Finals trophy and the Finals MVP trophy, in which case John Morant replied with Kevin Durant holding his own Finals MVP trophy. So a little bickering going back and forth. The two have both disclosed that there's mutual respect between them. Just a little poking fun at one another. But either way, it's a good situation because the Grizzlies kind of get rid of him. They get people back in which they're going to be able to actually use because Andre Iguodala wasn't playing for them. And Iguodala is going to go to a contender in Miami who's playing really well this season. Iguodala last year in the regular season averaged 5.7 points, 3.7 rebounds, and 3.2 assists. Not great numbers, of course, but Andre Iguodala is one of those players that's just so smart, so defensively sound, that his impact carries a lot more weight than his statistics. And even more so in the playoffs. He kind of coasts through the beginning part of the season, in which point he'll start to pick it up in the playoffs. And he brings that championship mentality and that impact in which I talked about. In the playoffs, his numbers increased to 9.8 points per game, 4.3 rebounds, and 4 assists. So he really starts to step it up in the playoffs. He's a huge reason why the Golden State Warriors were able to win all the championships that they did, including that finals MVP that he got in 2015. So Miami Heat got a good one, definitely a good piece for them to continue growing. And in return, the Grizzlies got Justice Winslow, who's averaging 11.3 points, 6.6 rebounds, and 4 assists. He has been injured as of late, has been playing that much, but he's a great acquisition. Great move for the Grizzlies. And now their young core is a really good sign for things to come. Their young core looks like this. John Morant, age 20. Justice Winslow, he's age 23. Dylan Brooks is 24. Jaren Jackson Jr., age 20. Brandon Clark, age 23. And Tyus Jones is 23 as well. So that core right there is young, which means they're going to be good for years to come. The Grizzlies, a team that looked to be down and out, a rebuild for sure, they turned things around very quickly. In the last year, they drafted John Morant. They traded up for Brandon Clark. They got rid of Mike Conley for Jay Crowder and a future first-round pick. They acquired DeAnthony Melton to take Josh Jackson. They got a first-rounder to take Andre Iguodala, and then they flipped Iguodala for Justice Winslow. So they've really been making some great moves to kind of bolster their squad after, kind of falling off because no one really expected them to really be anything this year. But now they're in a good position. They're in 8th place in the West and getting good pieces to continue this moving forward. Another big trade that happened was Clint Capella moved from the Houston Rockets. We talked about it a little bit last podcast. He ended up going to the Atlanta Hawks in a 4-team trade. Huge 4-team trade that saw, I believe, 16 players move around. The Hawks, the Rockets, the Nuggets, and Minnesota all involved in this trade. Minnesota does miss out on D'Angelo Russell. The Warriors kind of pulled out, stopped listening to trades surrounding him. But they do get Hernan Gomez, Malik Beasley, Jared Vanderbilt, and a first-round pick. Nothing really that exciting there. I mean, Hernan Gomez can be a decent player, but nothing extraordinary, really. The Rockets get Robert Covington, which is pretty extraordinary. He could be a good asset for them. And they get Jordan Bell as well, kind of just to bolster that center position because they really don't have a full-on center right now. They're looking at playing P.J. Tucker at the 5 to play a lot of small ball, but whenever they go up against people like the Lakers who have, Anthony Davis and McGee and Dwight Howard, they're going to need someone a little bit bigger down low. Jordan Bell isn't necessarily that much bigger, but he is a center, so that's why they got him as well. Nuggets get Noah Vonleh, Gerald Green, Shabazz Napier, Bates Diop, and a first-rounder. So I think they got a lot of good assets that they need, especially since they have so many injuries right now. And Atlanta get Capella and Nene. So that's a great pairing to go with Trae Young. He kind of needs somebody to help him out. And Capella averaging 13 points, 13 rebounds is a big statistical help for him. And really, I mean, their offensive strategy should be run pick and rolls for those two players, have Trae Young shoot as much as possible, and just have Capella rebound whatever he misses and put it back up. That should be their new go-to. Another trade was the Kings traded with the Hawks. Hawks involved again. The Kings get Alex Len and Jabari Parker from the Hawks for Dedmon, which we talked about a little bit last podcast as well. Jabari Parker is averaging 15 points and 6 rebounds, so a good acquisition there. And Len is 8.7 and 5.8. 8.7 points, 5.8 rebounds. So already better numbers than what Dedmon would be offering. So it's definitely a good move for the Kings. I see why the Hawks did it. It's just a little backup for Clint Capella to add some minutes, plus just some veteran experience as well in that locker room. Plus, Dedmon had some of his best years at Atlanta. So it's a familiar environment and a good acquisition, good trade for the both of these two teams. Another big trade saw the 76ers get Alec Burks and Glenn Robinson III for some draft picks. 2 weeks ago, the Warriors only had 1 second-round pick for the next 7 drafts. Through the Willie Cauley-Stein trade, the Alec Burks and Glenn Robinson trade, they now have 5. They have Utah's 2020, Dallas's 2020, Denver's 2021, Toronto's 2022, and their own 2022 draft picks coming in the next couple of years. So they really fixed their problems in terms of, draft capabilities, and we all know what the Warriors can do in the draft, what they've done with it in the past. They've built dynasties off of their draft, so it's important for them to have their picks, and they got it back with these trades, although they do lose Alec Burks and Glenn Robinson, great players. And the Sixers, they do have to find other trades to make, or they got to waive some players. Otherwise, they have to waive Glenn Robinson and Alec Burks after just getting them. But either way, this is really great for the Sixers. They need bench points so badly. Their bench is ranked 27th in the league in terms of scoring. And Alec Burks and Glenn Robinson III have been having career years for the Warriors in a year where they've had so many injuries. They've been able to have extended minutes, really grow their value. I kind of thought that they would end up being the bench that holster, or that people that holster the bench for the Golden State Warriors and see their success when their starters come back and they come off the bench and continue the way they've been playing. Obviously, the Warriors want to invest in the draft, and so they saw them more as trade value than anything. But either way, I think it's beneficial for both teams, the Sixers especially. Other trades that have been talked about, Shamet of the Clippers apparently is off limits in trade talks with the Knicks for Morris. So the Clippers are targeting Marcus Morris. Not sure if that's going to happen if they can't involve Shamet. The Lakers also want Morris, and they've also talked about getting Dinwiddie. They've also talked about Schroeder as well from the Thunder. So the Lakers really trying to push to find and bolster, the point guard position for their squad. So I'd be interested to see just who they end up landing with. I think at some point they will make a move. The Lakers at some point will bring somebody in my opinion. But those are the biggest trades as of right now. A lot of speculation, a lot of moves being made. But for the Toronto Raptors, a lot has stayed the same. Their winning streak continues. Meanwhile, the Sixers have been sliding. So good thing they've gotten some depth now that we just talked about. So we break down the 2 giants in the East coming up next.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines. They got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the GSMC Basketball Podcast. We just talked about some of the biggest trades headlined by Andre Iguodala, basically coming out of vacation to play for the Miami Heat now. We also talked about some other big trades like Capella to the Hawks and the Kings getting Jabari Parker and Alex Len, and 2 of the Warriors' best players this season in Alec Burks and Glenn Robinson III, heading to the Sixers to help out their bench, who's ranked 27th in the league in terms of scoring. So much needed help for them, especially when their offense has been struggling so much. And speaking of the Sixers, we're going to talk about them and the Toronto Raptors, who are enjoying very opposite types of success at the moment. Raptors have had a lot of success as of late. They're in second right now. They're only 6.5. I say only 6.5 back from the Bucks because the Bucks have been at some points up 7, up 8, what have you. They've been dominating the East, but the Raptors are 6.5 back right now in the East. They've already been flying extremely high when they came in to play against the Pacers. They've tied their team best with 11-game win streak coming into this game, so they're looking to extend that and get an outright new franchise record for win streak. And in the first quarter, they jumped out to a 30-20 lead where the Pacers just struggled shooting the ball. Their percentages were awful. And then the Pacers, in the second quarter, absolutely caught fire out of nowhere. They outscored the Raptors 43-18 in the second, and their shooting percentages skyrocketed. After shooting the ball extremely poorly in the first quarter, they went 66.7% from the field and 53.8% from three-point land compared to the Raptors, who were shooting 27 and 22 in those respective columns. So that's why the scoreline became as skewed as it was towards the end there. And in the first half, the Pacers ended up taking the lead 63-48. So the Raptors' win streak is in jeopardy. The biggest lead for Indiana at one point was 19, and at which point the Raptors really started making some headway. They cut the deficit to 86-82 heading into the fourth quarter. They fought all the way back, and then from there the Pacers seemed to have stopped any serious runs at a comeback that the Raptors had. Really just stopping them in their tracks every time they really got close. And with the score at 106-103, the Pacers went on a run that put them up 114-103 with 3:50 to go. And with 3:50 to go and you're up by 11, the Indiana Pacers look to close out this game, and they have done so a lot this year. They've been a great team. But no, the defending champs had something to say about it. They used all 48 minutes to really fight back in this game. Really went down to the wire. Siakam himself had 7 points and an assist on a Lowry 3 to make it 118-116 with a little over a minute left. From here, it was kind of poor execution from the Pacers on that last drive by Siakam that gave him his 7th point in those minutes. He kind of just turned it over mid-court, and they gave him a breakaway. So they were just being very careless with the ball late in the game, not really taking care of it, not really holding on to this lead like they should be. And then with 29.5 seconds left in the game, Serge Ibaka, who had struggled really early on, sank a 3 to give Toronto a 119-118 lead. So they fought all the way back from being 19 down to take the lead finally late in the game. And towards the end, Oladipo had a great open look at a 3 with 12 seconds left, but he couldn't get it to go. He actually got his own offensive board, kicked it out to Brogdon with 4 seconds left, and the opportunity to find a wide open Aaron Holiday, I believe, but he didn't find him. He was open on the wing. He was wide open. Instead, Brogdon dribbled into a double team and ended up turning the ball over, and the Raptors went the other way, kind of dribbled it out, and they win the game 119-118 and set a new franchise record winning streak of 12 games. According to the Elias Sports Bureau research, the Raptors are the 6th defending champions in the past 35 seasons to record their franchise longest winning streak. 4 of the previous 5 returned to the NBA Finals, and 3 went on to repeat. So if history repeats itself, the Toronto Raptors will be back in the NBA Finals. And if history is on their side, it looks like they might be defending their championship with another championship run. I'm not exactly sure how that's really going to go because, the East is very close and the Bucks have been dominating all year. And there's formidable opponents in the Celtics and the Heat. We'll get to that later. But yeah, if the history's on their side, they're in a good spot right now. Kyle Lowry had himself a fantastic game in this one. 32 points, 10 rebounds, and 8 assists for a near triple-double. He was all over the place. Ibaka also had a great game. He had a season-high 30 points, including that eventual game winner with 29 seconds to go. Basically just shooting with confidence. His coach told him in a timeout, just keep shooting. Shoot it with confidence. Just throw it up there. And he did. Ended up winning the game for them. He also added 7 rebounds and 3 assists. Pascal Siakam's back to his old ways. He scored 25 points, 9 rebounds, and 5 assists with 3 steals, including a really clutch one down the stretch that I talked about earlier. That kind of turned the game around and really gave them opportunity to win this game. And the Pacers played really well as well. They just couldn't hold on to the lead. Sometimes that's just how it goes when momentum's swinging. Brogdon had 24 points, 6 rebounds, 6 assists, but he had 6 turnovers. And that's really where it hurt them, because late down in the game, they kind of just handed them the game. The Raptors took it for sure, but it didn't help that they had a lot of turnovers down the stretch. Justin Holiday had 22 points, 5 rebounds, 3 assists, and 3 steals. McDermott had 19 points. Sabonis had 15, 11, and 10 for another triple-double this season, but he himself had a few turnovers as well. And then Oladipo is still not exactly back to the high-volume scoring we're used to seeing him a year ago, but he had 13 in this game. So the Raptors are really feeling themselves. They're on a great win streak. The Pacers kind of blow it, and they're on a 3-game losing streak. But it's okay, because the team that's right behind them in the standings right now are the Sixers, and they are on a 3-game win streak themselves. Their most recent loss coming at the hand of the Miami Heat. It was a pretty competitive first half with the lead going back and forth. It was the Heat, though, that came out on top with a 56-52 lead going into halftime. From there, the Heat kind of found a groove, really started pouring on the offense, where in comparison, the Sixers just struggled offensively. The Heat outscored the Sixers 41-25, with Jimmy having 15 of those. Usually, after a big lopsided quarter like that, the game tends to balance itself out. But no, not today. The Miami Heat continued to stay hot after outscoring them as much as they did, after pouring in 41 points in a single quarter. They backed it up with another great shooting output. They shot 77.8% from the field. They almost didn't miss. And they shot 63.6% from 3 to score another 40 points, capping off an 81-point second half. That's insane, which is a franchise record as well. And they ended up burying the Sixers 137-106. The Heat win this series 3-1. The regular season series, they've won it 3-1. And then looking at a Eastern Conference matchup in which they can play them potentially in the playoffs, this is a very good sign for them. They know they can go 3-1 up on a team as formidable as the Sixers. In the playoffs, they would just have to hold on, win one more game. Not many teams blow 3-1 leads, throwing shade to my own team for doing so. But it's a really good sign for the Miami Heat and a good position they want to be in moving forward, in case they do have to match up against the Sixers in the playoffs. On the other hand, the Sixers have been struggling, especially on the road. They've lost their 10th of their last 12 on the road, and they've been beaten 9 times by double digits already this season on the road. So they're a great team when it comes to playing at home, but they just can't find a way to find dubs on the road, which is a problem, especially if you're going to make late playoff pushes and you're going to go deep in the playoffs. You have to find a way to win some games on the road to help yourself out, especially since they're not going to be the 1 seed. So they want to always have that home court advantage. This 31-point defeat was the worst of the season for the Sixers. And the Butler is the main reason why. He went off. And after the game, he had a funny quote. He said he felt like Luka in this game, pointing to Luka Doncic, who's had a great year, second-year player out of Dallas Mavericks. He had 38 points, 7 rebounds with 3 steals. So he really did it all, played really well. He didn't want to give any fire to the fact that he was playing up against the Sixers, his old team. He said he was just focused on winning. Doesn't matter who's in front of him. But I feel like that's not necessarily true. He doesn't score 38 that often. And I feel like he did have a little more extra motivation in this one. Goran Dragic had 24 points, 3 rebounds, 6 assists off the bench. Great numbers for him. Duncan Robinson had 19. Adebayo, the recent first-time All-Star, had 18 points, 8 rebounds, 11 assists. And on the other side, the Sixers, Embiid played really well, 29 points, 12 rebounds. Mike Scott, not really sure about that one, 17 points, mostly all of them from 3, 2 of them from the line, but the rest all from the three-point land. Ben Simmons had 16 points, 8 rebounds, 7 assists. Not enough scoring output from me. Milton had 11, and then 4 more players had 6 points, including Harris and Horford. So just not enough high volume scoring from their high profile players, their all-star players. Horford does not seem to play very well when Embiid is on the court. I don't know what it is about that. Embiid seems to think that they just have no identity on offense. Sometimes they play slow, sometimes they play fast, sometimes they clog up, the post, sometimes there's no one in there, and they just really need to nail down an offensive strategy that really works for them when they need it. They don't really execute the half-court offense very well, and especially when it comes to playoff time, that's really what a lot of teams look at. So they really got to work on that. He says himself he doesn't really know when to find that balance between being out on the three-point land and giving space for the post, or when he needs to be down there himself and just doing work. So they need to figure that out. Horford also said that there's some issues going around in their locker room, but that they'll keep that internal for now. Not really sure what that alludes to, but if things are going wrong on the court, things are bound to happen in the locker room. So they got to figure some stuff out. There's 6 in the East right now. Luckily, they have a big cushion. Brooklyn Nets are behind them with 7.5 games back, so they do have some breathing room. But if they want to get higher up in this Eastern Conference race, they got to start figuring stuff out now. And luckily for them, they did acquire some new pieces that might just bring new life to the Sixers team. Some much-needed offensive scoring as well. So we'll see how they do. These two big teams in the East are on 2 very different paths right now. It's very similar to 2 teams in the West that are right now. So we look closer at the Nuggets and the Jazz coming up next.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA. From the UFC to extreme cage fighting, they got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the GSMC Basketball Podcast. We just broke down the Toronto Raptors, who are on a franchise record 12-game winning streak, versus the Philadelphia Sixers, who are now on a 3-game skid. They've been playing kind of poorly as of late. Embiid seems to think they just don't have an identity on offense, and they have not been executing on defense either. So they have been struggling, have been sliding. Luckily, they have a bit of a cushion with the Nets being as far back as they are. But for them to be actual contenders, they got to start figuring stuff out. Hopefully with the acquisition of Alec Burks and Glenn Robinson III, they can kind of spark some new life into this team that's been struggling to really give them, help in the locker room and help on the court as well. So 2 very different teams in the East in terms of the Raptors and the Sixers, and then 2 very different teams in the West as of right now are the Denver Nuggets and the Jazz. These 2 teams played each other Wednesday night. But before I get to that, I'm going to look back a little bit just to kind of put some chronological order to this. The Jazz's very last game was Saturday, so they haven't played for a while. They played against the Blazers, where they got blown out 124-107. I talked about it last podcast, kind of alluded to it. Damian Lillard went off. He had 51 points, and he handed Utah its 4th straight loss, where they had lost to the Nuggets, Spurs, and the Rockets in that time. So they were having a lot of issues at the time. They caught Lillard at a terrible time because he was in an absolute inferno. But before all of that, they had a 4-game win streak. And then before even that, they had lost 1 game. But before that, they had a 10-game win streak. So things have fallen off real quick for the Utah Jazz. And it's really unfortunate to see. The game against the Blazers, they got no production from Gobert, or Ingles for that matter, points-wise. They had 6 and 3 respectively. So that's really never going to help you when two of your bigger stars are not being productive on the offensive end. Meanwhile, the Denver Nuggets' recent game before matching up against the Jazz was, funny enough, against the Blazers. Small world. They had Murray back finally after missing 10 games with an ankle injury, but they still didn't have Millsap, Michael Porter Jr., or Plumlee. So it wasn't going to be an easy task, especially when Damian Lillard had been as good as he has been. Gary Harris and Torrey Craig kind of took turns going up against the blazing hot Lillard, like I said, and they actually held him to just 21 points on 8 for 23 shooting. So the man, the myth, the legend, Dame Dollar finally cooled off just a bit for them to squeak out a win. That combined with a near triple-double from Jokic, where he got 29 points, 13 rebounds, and 9 assists with 2 steals and 3 blocks, led to a 127-99 thrashing of the Blazers. That's a great stat line for Jokic. He's really been stepping it up as of late, been playing really well, very confident. And it makes sense because they've had so many injuries, so a lot of the responsibility of taking over has been on him. And it's really revitalized his game because I felt like early on in the season, he was really underperforming, not really putting up the numbers people would have expected because he can definitely be in that MVP race. He's a triple-double machine, and now he's starting to show it, put up some big numbers. Murray had 20 points in his return, but then Grant ended up hurting himself in this one. So now, in this game leading up to the Utah Jazz, they didn't have Plumlee, Paul Millsap, Barton, Jeremy Grant, Michael Porter Jr., all of them were hurt. They had 7 active players against Utah. And not to mention, this is on a back-to-back. So I don't care how much Utah has been struggling. They should absolutely win this game. There's no excuses. They looked to do so early on, playing really well through 2 quarters. They took a 57-49 lead at halftime, mostly from Bogdanovich, who had 14 points. The Jazz would push that to 71-56 before the Nuggets, out of nowhere, went on a 20-4 run that resulted in Denver taking its first lead since the first quarter, making it 76-75. And you kind of look at this one saying, oh my goodness, are we really going to lose this one? After having this many days off, after the Nuggets just played a game the night before, they have 7 active players, not even some of their starters. Utah responded. They answered the bell pretty well, extended its lead out again. As the Nuggets rested their stars, they kind of needed a breather, so the Jazz took advantage. But again, the Nuggets fought back. They even held the Jazz to a single field goal in the final 7 minutes. They could only manage 1 field goal. The Nuggets end up taking this game 98-95. An improbable victory for them. I mean, honestly, baffling, the fact that the Jazz lost this game. This was Utah's first loss against Denver at home in 9 consecutive games. And to lose it in this fashion, the way that they did, is not a good sign for where the Utah Jazz were and where they want to be. Jokic did have a historic night. He had 31 points, 21 rebounds, and 10 assists for his 11th triple-double of the season. He's the 10th player ever with a 30-20-10 stat line in NBA history. And he's the second in 35 years to get it with a win. The only other person in the last 35 years to do that, DeMarcus Cousins. Jokic was going up against Rudy Gobert most of the time. And we've talked about Gobert before. He's, defending Defensive Player of the Year. He's a tough person to score against. Well, not for Jokic. Jokic was 13 for 14 against him when he was his primary defender. He was eating him alive in this game. Murray also had back-to-back games after missing the last 10 with an ankle injury, so you're not really sure how well he was going to hold up in this one. Well, he held up just fine. He had 31 points and 4 assists. He led the Nuggets with scoring. He played really well. And then Monte Morris had 15, and Torrey Craig had 8 points and 12 rebounds. Harris, who generally shoots pretty well for the Denver Nuggets, he had clutch free throws down the stretch that extended the lead for the Nuggets, really held on to this one. But he shot 0 for 13 from the field. He did not make a single field goal in this one. That's a new franchise record for the worst shooting night without a field goal. So that's not a good way to make history for yourself. And the fact that the Nuggets won despite him missing every single field goal is insane to me. Absolutely insane. The Jazz, on the other hand, Mike Conley scored 21 points, had 8 rebounds, 5 assists. That's a decent stat line for him. Donovan Mitchell only had 18 points and 8 rebounds. He kind of struggled against the defense that the Nuggets threw at him. And then Bogdanovich was the most disappointing for me. Remember how I said he was leading them in scoring at halftime with 14? He finished with 16. 16, which means he only scored 2 points in the second half. Where did he go? What was he doing? He added 5 rebounds and 5 assists, so rounded out his stat line, but the fact that he found nothing in the second half, very disappointing. Not a good sign for the Utah Jazz. Gobert played decent. He had 16 points, 14 rebounds. Good double-double for him. And then Clarkson added 16 points as well off the bench. Utah are now in 5th after being as high as 2nd in the West. Remember talking about it a few podcasts ago. They had won 18 of 20 games at one point. But this recent slide means that they're on a 5-game losing streak all of a sudden. I'm not sure what happened to them because they were flying high. They were playing extremely well. I think it's probably because they've been on the road for a bit and they have a 14-13 record. And they just, I don't know what it is. I think it's a mid-season lull for them. They've really got to figure out their identity again. Donovan Mitchell was not happy after the game, said that it's not where they were used to being, and they know they have to be better for where they want to go. They are one of the better teams in the West on a good day. And really, they're tied from a record standpoint with the Rockets, so they could be in 4th with just a win and with the Rockets' loss. But now they're 3 games back from 3rd place, the Denver Nuggets, 3.5 back from the Clippers, and that just means that they're 6.5 back from the Los Angeles Lakers, who are still crushing it in 1st place. The Nuggets somehow still battling. Got to give it to them. They're in 3rd place, like I just said, and they're only half a game back from 2nd and 3 games up on 4th, which is pretty impressive, especially considering the fact that they've had so many injuries. And now they've acquired a couple more players, too, to bolster their roster. So the Nuggets are in a great place for when they finally get all their players back. So you got to give it up for them, but it's disappointing to see where the Jazz have fallen to. But another team in the West are the Grizzlies, who continue to improve. And with their recent acquisitions and their now very young core that we talked about earlier, they look to make some noise in the near future. In their most recent game, they went up against the Mavericks, and they came out victorious. Spoiler alert. We break it down and take a look at how the Grizzlies match up in the West, so stay with us.
Check out the show built around the women of MMA. From the UFC to the extreme cage fighting, we got the fights covered.
Listen.
It's the Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. The latest news of upcoming fights, discussions of previous matches. Join us as we talk to and about the biggest names in women's mixed martial arts. Past, present, and future. When it's the women's fight game, you know where to listen to. The Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast.
Welcome back to the GSMC Basketball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Isiah Kidos. We just talked about the Denver Nuggets, how they're holding on in the West, playing really well as of late, despite the fact that they have had so many injuries, they're still in third place. They're only half a game back from second. Somehow they've been playing as well as they have. Jokic especially, who's just had a career triple-double, a historic triple-double, a 30-20-10 stat line. It's only happened a few times in history, so he's one of them. And the Utah Jazz, who have been sliding as of late after winning 18 of 20 games, they're on a 5-game skid. They've fallen all the way down to 5th place in the West. Not sure what's going on with them. They got to figure it out quick. But other teams in the West that are making some noise are the Memphis Grizzlies. The Grizzlies are young, and they are very good. They're kind of solidifying themselves in this playoff race right now. They're 8th, so nothing to really be that excited about. They would go up against the Lakers. They're 3 games up on 9th, though, who are the Portland Trailblazers. And they've kind of had an up-and-down season. San Antonio Spurs have kind of floated around there as well. The Pelicans are making a run up. We'll break that down a little bit later. But, yeah, they're 5 back from the Mavs, who are in 7th. And they're 7-3 in their last 10 games. So they've had a lot of success recently, and they're really starting to put it together. And speaking of the Mavericks, they matched up against them recently. And unfortunately for the Mavericks, they were without their star player, Luka Doncic, who for the 4th consecutive game has missed this one due to spraining his ankle. And during this time, they're 2-2 during this stretch, and they're 4-5 on the season without Luka Doncic. So not a great record, obviously, since he pretty much runs their entire offense, and he is their entire team for the most part, especially when, they've lost Dwight Powell. Porzingis is still coming into his own, which he is in this absence of Luka Doncic. We'll get into it. But yeah, they also did not have Seth Curry or JJ Barea, so they were missing a lot of key players in this one against a very confident Grizzlies team. Nevertheless, the game was very competitive in the first, with only 1 point separating the team. Porzingis had 15 points in the first quarter, and the Mavs took a 32-31 lead at the end of it. In the second, Porzingis continued to lead the Mavericks in scoring, but the tide of momentum kind of shifted, and the Grizzlies ended up taking a 59-56 lead going into half. Porzingis took a shot to the nose that left him bloody, so he had to leave the court for a bit, and he later found out he had broken his nose, but he did return in this one. He didn't think too much of it. He said he didn't have a headache, so no concussion protocol, throw him back on the court. During this time that he was off, though, the Grizzlies had started to take control. When he got back, it was too late. They had gone on a 21-3 run and outscored the Mavericks 41-22 in the third quarter, with their lead ballooning to 25 in the fourth at one point. So the Grizzlies really made use of the fact that Porzingis wasn't on the court, really started pouring on the offense, and after falling behind that much, the Mavericks just couldn't muster up enough offense to make a comeback. So the Grizzlies took this one 121-107 to move over 500 for the first time this season. They're 26-25 now. It's very exciting stuff for the Grizzlies, who's making a great push in this playoff race. And it's crazy to me that this Grizzlies team, is playing as well as it is. This is the Grizzlies' 13th win in its last 16 games, and they haven't made the playoffs since 2017. I mean, when all their key players, like Marc Gasol, Mike Conley, Zach Randolph, the bully team the Memphis Grizzlies were back then, making the playoffs consistently and being a force in the West. After all that blew up, they really didn't have anything. I remember being in a sports media class at my old university, Academy of Art, and having to make reports on this team each week and just thinking I don't want to talk about this team. They're so bad. They were bottom of the West pretty much the entire year. So it was really depressing to have to follow them for the whole semester. But now, they've really turned things around in a very fast way. Dylan Brooks ends up being a pretty decent player. John Morant's a fantastic draft pick. And they have just great pieces around them to really build this team. And they've done a lot of good work so far to be in 8th place, and no one expected that at all, especially not me. The Mavericks, on the other hand, other than Porzingis in this game, totally struggled. Porzingis had 32 points and 12 rebounds, so he's had a lot of good games as of late with the absence of Luka Doncic. He's really taken over the role of just leading this team. Jalen Brunson, who started at point guard with no Luka and with no JJ Barea, he had 20 points, 2 rebounds, and 6 assists, so he had pretty decent stats. But their next highest scorer in Tim Hardaway Jr. shot 23% from the field. He had 14 points and 6 rebounds. Maxi Kleber, their next highest scorer with 10 points, shot 36% from the field. He had 6 rebounds as well. So the Mavericks really just couldn't find any scoring, any consistent scoring at least. They had to completely rely on Porzingis, and the dude broke his nose. So it was really unfortunate for them. They couldn't find enough offense to really stick with this Grizzlies team, who played really well. John Moran especially, 21 points, only 1 rebound and 3 assists, but getting it done on the offensive end. Jaren Jackson Jr., his running mate, his 20-year-old running mate, had 19.6 rebounds, 3 assists, with a steal and 2 blocks. This kid is a monster. These two are going to be a great duo for a long time. Tyus Jones, another young buck, 19 points, which is a new career high. Brandon Clark, 18.6 rebounds. And then Dylan Brooks, 13 points and 6 rebounds himself. After the game, the Grizzlies announced a multi-year contract extension for Dylan Brooks, who is the only player to have played and started in every game for them this year. He's averaging a career-best 16.1 points, 3.4 rebounds, and 2.1 assists. And he got a $35 million deal over 3 years. So they're really securing their future with him, really making sure that this young core sticks together. And I think it's a really smart move for them, because if they keep this young core together and kind of develop them instead of just going for big free agents, the Grizzlies could be really dangerous in the next few years. They're already in 8th place right now, and with as young as they are, they're only going to get better and better as time goes on. And so it really raises the question, just how good are they right now in this Western Conference? Well, we're going to break it down. First place is still Los Angeles Lakers. No one's going to stop them. They're playing extremely well at a very high volume. They're only 6-4 in their last 10, but for whatever reason, they just feel untouchable in a way. They're winning by a margin of 7.5 on average. They're 3 games up on second place, the LA Clippers, who have found a little more success as of late. I've criticized them for being very inconsistent, but since being pretty much injury-free other than Patrick Beverley recently, they've been playing a lot better. They're 8-2 in their last 10. They're going to hold it down second place right now. Key pieces in Kawhi Leonard, Paul George, they're going to lead them to a great Western Conference race. I think they're going to catch up with the Lakers, really combat them, see just how durable this Lakers team really is. Both of these two teams looking to get acquisitions and continue this race, and we'll see who ends up in first. Behind them are the Denver Nuggets. We talked about them already. Houston Rockets are in 4th right now. I'm still not convinced about the whole James Harden, Russell Westbrook. I mean, at times it looks like it can work because of just the high volume scoring that the two of them can offer. But them moving Clint Capella is kind of an interesting move for me. I don't see the benefit in it, especially since they both have players that shoot as much as they do. They need a big guy down the middle, like Capella, who's going to get offensive boards whenever he can. If you're going to be playing small ball and PJ Tucker at the 5, I just think that teams are going to go big against them and completely bully them. The Utah Jazz are sliding, but I think they can still be in this playoff race, no doubt. They have the pieces to do so. Oklahoma City Thunder in 6, which is really, really impressive as well, because like we've talked about before, no one expected that either. Chris Paul, although they are going to trade away Gallinari, I've heard, to the Miami Heat as well to join Andre Iguodala, which would be insane. And if doing so, I feel like the Thunder will probably fall off just a bit, because Gallinari does hold a lot of weight, especially on the offensive end. The Dallas Mavericks are in 7th right now. And when they get Luka back and get Luka and Porzingis playing consistently together, they can start building a lot more momentum, a lot more chemistry, and I think they'll continue to be a force and move up in this Western Conference race in the standings. And then they come the Grizzlies. So the people that are going to threaten the Grizzlies spot at number 8, I think, are the Blazers. They definitely can make a push. They're 9th right now, 3 games back, and they have the pieces to do so. Damian Lillard, CJ McCollum, Melo, Whiteside, Nurkic when he comes back. They have a lot of pieces to make a move and get by them. So I think it's possible. It's definitely possible. And then the other team I think that can really push up there and maybe pass the Grizzlies, sneak in at the number 8 spot, are the Pelicans. They've been playing really well lately. Although they're only 5-5 in their last 10, don't let that fool you. They're a really great team, have a lot of potential. Just a few weeks ago, they were second to last, third to last, and now they're, 6 games out of 8th place. Zion Williamson's already playing really well. Pair that with Lonzo Ball, who's just going to be feeding him all day, and has found a better shooting form, so he's more productive on the offensive end. Got Brandon Ingram, who's probably one of the most improved players this season. And they've got a lot of pieces around them to make this team well-rounded. And I don't think they're going to make any moves in the trade deadline, not getting rid of Drew Holiday. So they could make a push this year to be in that 8th spot. I think that's those two teams in the Pelicans and the Blazers, the only teams that really can push the Grizzlies out of a playoff spot. But only time will tell, really. But the Grizzlies aren't the only ones who made some big moves in the trade market to get themselves in a good position. We talked about it earlier. The Heat have made some noise as well. So we'll take a look at their most recent game and see how they stack up in the Eastern Conference. Could they be the biggest threat to the Milwaukee Bucks? Find out next.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC Basketball Podcast. We just talked about how the Memphis Grizzlies have developed a young core and have developed a winning mentality and a winning way about them. They've been playing really well this season. They're 7-3 in their last 10. They've won 13 games in their last, I can't even remember how many, but they've been playing really well as of late, putting it together, and they're in 8th place somewhat comfortably right now. They're 3 games up on the Blazers. And in the Western Conference, I think they can sneak in, keep that 8th seed, and maybe make some noise in the playoffs as possible. But we'll see. Only time will tell. And then looking on the other side, the Eastern Conference, Miami Heat made some moves, and they are looking to be even better than they have been this year, which has been really good. We talked about it earlier. How they thrashed the Sixers, how they made some big moves. They're looking like title contenders, especially with these new players that they're trying to acquire. They got Andre Iguodala, championship mentality right there. Great acquisition, great person to have coming off the bench. He can shut people down defensively. He won't add too much offensively at this point in his career, I don't think. But he'll add some definitely in the playoffs because he just wakes up for the playoffs. I don't know what it is about him. And then if they add Gallinari as well, the Heat could be some serious contenders because Gallinari brings a lot offensively and defensively. So we got to talk about their most recent game against the Clippers, where they ended up losing, unfortunately for them. This game was a game of two halves. It was a really tight contest, but the zone defense of the Miami Heat really caught the Clippers off guard, kind of troubled them. And they ended up holding the Clippers to 29.6% shooting from three-point land. They only made 8 threes in the first half, so they were really struggling that first half. And then the Heat led 58-55 going into halftime. And Jimmy was leading the way with 10 points, 4 rebounds, 5 assists, only through one half. So that's a really good stat line to have. Because if you say he matches that, he ends up with 28 and 10. So that's a great stat line. Then in the third, the Clippers kind of started figuring out how to really run their offense. And after scoring only 8 threes in the first half, they scored 9 threes in the third quarter alone. I don't even see how that's possible. They were just going off. The Warriors actually just set a franchise record with 10 threes in one quarter, which I think is crazy because they didn't have Steph Curry or Klay Thompson or Kevin Durant. But somehow they did that. So that's a lot of threes to score in one quarter. The Clippers outscored the Heat 37-22 in the third quarter. And then from there, the Clippers never really cooled down. They shot 61.9% from the field and 63.6% from three, adding another 7 3-pointers in the fourth quarter. So when they're shooting this well and making this many threes, of course the Heat are going to get buried. This time they outscored the Heat 36-31. Shamet had 14 points in the fourth quarter, and 3 of them were threes. It could be so much worse for the Heat other than losing this game. They lost it 128-111, but it could be so much worse for them. Jimmy Butler ended up getting hurt in the fourth quarter. He strained his shoulder, and he's getting an MRI Thursday. So hopefully for them, it's nothing too serious. They're going to need him, especially now that they're acquiring some good pieces to really make a playoff push or make a championship run. On the other side of the ball, Beverly left with a sore right groin. He's been very injury-prone this year, which is interesting to see. So hopefully for the Clippers, he's not injured too long because he's a guy that helps run their offense. He's just a defensive nuisance as well. So he's a good player for them, and if he's injured for long durations, it's not going to be good for them, especially since they just recently finally got healthy again. So we'll see how that goes. The Clippers ended up with 24 3-pointers, which is a new franchise record. Their previous record was 20, so they beat that by 4. 24 3-pointers, that's a lot. And now Miami is 12-13 on the road. And in those games that they've lost on the road, against teams from the Western Conference, they're 3-7. So picture it like this. If they're in the NBA Finals, they made it somehow. They're 3-7 on the road against a team in the West. You go up against a team like the Lakers and you're 3-7 against teams in the West on the road, you're going to get whooped. And so they need to find a way to get W's on the road, much like the Sixers that we talked about earlier. Paul George for the Clippers had a nice double-double, 23 points, 5 rebounds, and 10 assists. Shamet, who's been playing really well, a player we talked about earlier being off limits in the trade for the Knicks when they're trying to acquire Marcus Morris, he had 23 points and 6 assists, most of them coming in the fourth quarter. Kawhi Leonard had 14 points, 7 rebounds, and 9 assists. And then Harrell and Lou Williams had 14. Zubac and Jermichael Green had 12, and so did Mo Harkless. Mo Harkless had 11. So they had 8 players in double figures. Pretty much everyone who played big minutes, minus Beverly because he got hurt. He only had 5 points. But everyone had double-digit scoring that played high minutes in this game for the Clippers. On the other hand, only 6 players for the Heat scored in double digits, but they didn't score as high volume as the Clippers did. Derrick Jones Jr. led the way with 25 points and 9 rebounds. Adebayo had another great game, had a double-double in this one, 22 points, 11 rebounds, 6 assists. Kendrick Nunn had 13 points, 3 rebounds, and 6 assists. Dragic had 13 points, 4 rebounds, 4 assists, and then Butler had 11, 5, and 7. And he only had 1 point in the second half. He did get hurt in the fourth, but after leading the Heat in scoring in most categories, he only added a little bit more in that third quarter. And I think his stat line would have been a lot better if he got to play in that fourth quarter. Probably would have been better for the Heat as well. Probably would have made them more competitive. So now, thinking about their new acquisitions in Iguodala, possibly Gallinari in the next day, because the deadline's coming up, do they have what it takes to make a really big push in the East? If we look at the East, the Milwaukee Bucks are clear favorites to win. They're in first place. They're 43-7. They're 6.5 games up on second place. They have the best player in the NBA, best player in the world. Argue with me now, Giannis Antetokounmpo. He's an absolute monster. He's a force on both the offensive and defensive side. He's got Eric Bledsoe and he's got Chris Middleton helping him out. And so he's got a lot going for him. And this team is rolling. They've got a lot of chemistry, playing really well. And they're beating teams by a margin, average-wise, 12.4 points. Behind them are the Toronto Raptors. They've been playing really well. They're the defending champions, so got to put some respect on their name. They're a game and a half up on third place, and they're just playing really well since getting their better players back in Pascal Siakam, Marcus Gasol. They had Powell hurt for a while, and they're getting healthy at the right time. Kyle Lowry held it down. Van Vliet held it down, and they've just been getting wins. The Boston Celtics are in third. They're a game up on the Heat right now. And to me, I think the Celtics could be the biggest threat in the East other than the Bucks. They have pieces like Jason Tatum, Kemba Walker, Jaylen Brown, Marcus Smart coming off the bench, and Gordon Hayward. They've got a lot of great pieces, and they're looking to gain one more piece as well in this trade market. So if they get someone else by the trade deadline, a center perhaps, they could be probably the best team in the East. And then coming in fourth is the Heat. Add on the players that they could potentially get, the players that they've already gotten. They could definitely be top three, for sure. I think that the Raptors won't stay there in second the whole year. But in terms of beating the Bucks, I still think the Celtics have the best chance. The Pacers come in at fifth. They've kind of been on a skid as of late, 3-game skid, 5-5 in their last 10, not playing that well. But they did get Victor Oladipo back. He's still kind of getting into the groove of things. They're still trying to figure out how to play with him, rotation-wise, chemistry-wise, all that jazz. Sabonis, TJ Warren, Brogdon, they've got great pieces, and they're a great defensive team, so they have a lot of capabilities to be dangerous in this Eastern Conference. The 76ers are kind of hit or miss for me. If they can start gaining some more chemistry, some more offensive identity like Joel Embiid says they need, then they can really make some noise. Alec Burks and Glenn Robinson III are for sure going to help them. They can get up to the top 4, maybe even the top 3, but they're going to need a lot of work before that happens. The Brooklyn Nets are sitting in 7th. I don't even necessarily think that they might stay there. I mean, I think they will just because the closest team outside of the playoff race right now is 4.5 games back in the Chicago Bulls. So really, this Eastern Conference is very top-heavy. The Brooklyn Nets, decent team, they'll sneak into the playoff race. And the Orlando Magic come in at 8, and they are awful. 22-29. The Brooklyn Nets, 23-27. Those two teams won't make any noise at all. They'll be first-round exits. They'll just get a playoff berth, and they can say, oh, we made it to the playoffs. Thank you. Chicago Bulls, like I said, in 9th place. They're 4.5 back. They're 19-33. So if they even make a push into the playoffs, I'll be shocked. But it would make sense because maybe the Orlando Magic break down. They've had a lot of injuries as of late. But really, there's no teams that can make any real noise in this. But a big thing to say right now, the Atlanta Hawks are no longer the worst team in the East. Congratulations, the Atlanta Hawks. And now they got some pieces as well. They can move up. They got Capella and Trae Young. They can move up. I don't know if they'll make it into the playoff race, but who knows? I mean, anything is possible at this point. If the Chicago Bulls are 19-33, or even look higher, the Orlando Magic are 22-29. The Atlanta Hawks are about 8 games back. It's possible. But yeah, the Cleveland Cavaliers are the worst team in the East right now, 13-39. Luckily, they're not the worst team in the NBA. That team is still the Warriors at 12-40. But yeah, the East is very top-heavy. That Bucks, Raptors, Celtics, Heat, Pacers, Sixers, that top 6, those teams will shuffle around a bunch. But anything that happens below that really won't matter. Who's going to end up on top? It'll be the Bucks. But who's going to end up in the finals? It's probably the Bucks. But I think the best team to combat them would be the Celtics as of right now. Maybe the Heat can make that push with their recent acquisitions, but only time will tell. So, I mean, really, how the East will shake up is kind of all course for speculation. It's up to educated guesses. And speaking of educated guesses, I give my predictions on the biggest games coming up over the next couple of days, when we'll be right back.
Are you looking to get your college football fix? Looking to get the latest news on your favorite school's team? The GSMC College Football Podcast is your ticket to all things college football. Join us as we talk college football from the national championship, the college rivalries, the bowl game, to the Heisman Trophy. To which conference is the best? We've got you covered for the Big Ten, SEC, Big 12, the Pac-12, ACC, and everything in between. Download the GSMC College Football Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back, GSMC Basketball Podcast. We just broke down the Eastern Conference, kind of talked about the Miami Heat, who've made some recent acquisitions in Andre Iguodala. They're looking to get Gallinari as well, really make a push in this Eastern Conference race. They're 4th place right now, a game back from the Celtics, 9 back from the Bucks, who are just running away with it. And they just recently lost to the Clippers. Hopefully for them, Jimmy Butler isn't seriously hurt. He did sprain or tweak his shoulder. He's getting an MRI on Thursday. Not really sure how the East is going to shake out. It's all up for speculation, like I teased. And speaking of speculation, we're doing some more predictions. Some big games happen over the next couple days. Some big matchups. On Thursday, the Houston Rockets and the Los Angeles Lakers are matching up. Los Angeles Lakers being in first place, 3 games up on the second place Clippers. Houston Rockets being in 4th place, 6.5 back from the Lakers. They're on a 3-game win streak, and the Lakers are on a 2-game win streak. Both 6-4 in their last 10. So they have had pretty similar recent success. But we talked about this before. We've talked about this matchup. The Rockets have a lot of firepower in Russell Westbrook and James Harden. And it's kind of funny because I talked about this potential matchup earlier in the podcast when I talked about the trade and that the Rockets made. They got rid of Clint Capella. And they're going to go small ball and play PJ Tucker. So given that information, going up against a Los Angeles Lakers team who are huge, Anthony Davis, LeBron James, JaVale McGee, Dwight Howard, the list goes on. I don't think the Rockets are going to have anything down low to really battle against these guys. And with as good as the Lakers have been all year, only lost 11 times, the Rockets are in for a long night. James Harden is going to have to score 50. Russell Westbrook will have to add about 30. Maybe Eric Gordon will drop in 20. I don't know how they're going to win this game. I really don't. I'm going to give this one to the Los Angeles Lakers. They're first in the West for a reason. They've been playing so well this season. They've been very consistent. They got King James. They got Anthony Davis, who's on a tear, playing some of his best basketball. Could be in the MVP race. Could be in the Defensive Player of the Year race. I just don't think the Rockets have enough to withhold them and stop them. Small ball will not work against bully ball that the Lakers will be playing. So I think the Lakers will win this one by about 10 points, probably. The Rockets don't necessarily lose by that much always, but they give up around 114 points a game. And funny enough, the Lakers actually score 114 points per game. So I think that, the Rockets will lose about 8 or 10 points, and the Lakers are going to take this one on Thursday night. Moving on Friday, the 76ers play against the Grizzlies. And maybe some people look at this game and think, that's not really that big of a matchup. But for me, I think it might be. The Grizzlies, like we talked about earlier, have been making a lot of headway in the Western Conference. They've been playing really well. And the 76ers have been kind of suspect for most of the year. They've been very inconsistent, have been on a 3-game skid, haven't really found that offensive flow. But they're getting key players in Alec Burks, Glenn Robinson III, who are having career years. So I think in their debut against a team like the Grizzlies, who have been on the rise and playing really well, this is going to be a really big matchup. It's going to be a big test for the Grizzlies to see really where they are in terms of this playoff race. They're squeezing in at 8 right now, but could they really make some noise against some of the bigger teams, in not only the Western Conference, but the Eastern Conference? So it'll be a difficult test for them for sure. But for whatever reason, I'm going to go with the 76ers on this one. I think with their new acquisitions, like I talked about, Alec Burks, Glenn Robinson III, they're going to add some much-needed offense for the 76ers, and they're going to bring just that extra edge that they need, a little bit of a revitalization for the locker room. And even though the Grizzlies have been as good as they've been all year, I feel like they're going to go quiet a bit against the 76ers. Joel Embiid is a much bigger star than John Morant. Ben Simmons, if he can find some sort of offense, get to the basket, get some easy buckets, he'll have an impact on this game. If he scores over 20 points, they'll win. Joel Embiid is going to go off. He always does. He's only had really just one poor performance all year when he had that 1 for 11 shooting game. Tobias Harris, he needs to step up. He's been playing really poor lately. Hasn't been really producing much on the offensive end. Horford, he doesn't play really well with Embiid, so I don't expect that much from him. But I do expect Alec Burks and Glenn Robinson III to really establish themselves, really bring that offensive necessary points that the Sixers need, and they're going to bury the Grizzlies. They're going to beat them, not by a lot. The margin of victory for me is 3. And so I think the Sixers are going to win just a little bit more than 3, maybe by 4, maybe by 5, something like that. It's going to be a close contest. Don't get me wrong, they're not going to roll over the Grizzlies by any means, but they are going to end their 3-game skid. Sixers are going to get back on the winning side of things, and that's just what I think. The game after that, also on Friday, are the Toronto Raptors versus the Indiana Pacers. We just talked about their last matchup, how the Pacers got stunned, blew a 19-point lead to let the Raptors get back in the game. For Ibaka to hit an eventual game winner, get a career-high 30 points. And the Pacers really just gave this one away, which I thought was crazy because it also resulted in the Raptors getting their franchise record 12th straight win. And we talked about it before when, franchises follow up an NBA championship with a year where they have their highest streak of winning. They ended up getting back in the championship. So I don't know if that's necessarily true. If history will be on their side. But in this particular matchup, it won't happen again. The Indiana Pacers are going to come back with a vengeance. They're going to make sure they go up big on this team, and they bury them big in this game. The Toronto Raptors have been winning for too long. Eventually, that has to give out. And it's going to give out against the Indiana Pacers. The Pacers have too much ability, too much grit to them to lose like this against the Raptors again. So Sabonis is going to have a great game. TJ Warren's going to have a great game. Brogdon will not turn over the ball 6 times, especially in crunch time. He will fix that. And I feel like Victor Oladipo will finally start to figure it out, finally start to bring in that large outpouring of scoring that he can do. The Raptors do have Siakam. He'll play well. You already know that. Kyle Lowry, I feel like, is going to be quiet. Ibaka definitely won't have a season-best 30 points again. And so I think the Pacers are going to take this game. They're going to start moving back up the Eastern Conference like they should be. They're going to end their 3-game skid as well. So I got 2 teams that are on 3-game skids that are going to end it and win their games. The Pacers will beat the Raptors. And then finally on Saturday, another game where you might think, it's not that big of a deal. Boston Celtics versus the Oklahoma City Thunder. And, most people would think, the Celtics should probably win this game. And I would agree with you. I definitely agree with you. I think that the Celtics should win this game. I just talked about how great they are and how they're probably the best team to go up against the Milwaukee Bucks in the East. But it's hard to say because the Thunder have been good all year long. They've been a team that's shocked a lot of people. No one expected them to be as competitive as they are. But they are. They're here. They've been doing it. They're in 6th place in the West right now. They're on a 3-game win streak. They're 8-2 in their last 10 games. Whereas the Boston Celtics are on a 5-game win streak, and they're 8-2 in their last game. So they got some winning streaks going up against one another. They have similar records in their last 10 games. So it's going to be a battle. It's going to be a fantastic game. But here's why I think the Celtics are going to win. First of all, they have more scoring ability, more star power to them. Marcus Smart coming off the bench. He comes off the bench. Yeah, Kemba Walker starting, Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, and Gordon Hayward starting. Whereas the Thunder, they could potentially be losing Gallinari in a trade, so they wouldn't have him. They do have Chris Paul. He can pull the strings really well. He's been playing some of his best basketball. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander as well, another player that could potentially win Most Improved Player. He's been playing really well, but I don't think he'll have a big game in this one. I don't. Steven Adams could potentially be a big X factor in this one, but at the end of the day, I think the Celtics are going to win this game by 5. I think they're going to take this one. It's going to be tight. The Thunder most likely are going to go down by a lot, make a push for a comeback, but then they're going to fall short. It's just what they do. Sometimes they come back and win the game, but against a team like the Celtics, it just won't be enough this time. And so that's my final prediction, and that's going to do it for this podcast. Thank you for listening to the GSMC Basketball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I would like to ask that you please remember to subscribe to the show and write a nice review because that really helps us out. Also, if you can please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, I would greatly appreciate that. I'm Isiah Quiroz. Thank you guys, and see you next time.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.